No mai, haere mai. Kia ora, good evening and welcome. My name is Nicole Bremner. I'm your host for this evening, and it's my very great pleasure to be part of this very special discussion on managing migraine in Aotearoa as part of Brain Awareness Month. Until recently, I was a senior reporter working for One News at Television New Zealand, and my specialist responsibility was health reporting. And tonight, with our specially assembled and inspiring panel, we'll delve into the very latest learnings on the world's most common neurological condition, and the reason I suspect that many of you are here tonight. Our expert panel will be joining us on stage very shortly. So on with our evening now. It's estimated 753,000 New Zealanders, 750,000 people, are living with the discomfort and impaired function that migraine delivers. I was once part of that cohort. I've been asked to share my migraine story tonight, and because I'm sure it will be a familiar one to many of you, I promise it's going to be very brief. I was diagnosed with migraine disease almost unexpectedly when I was in my mid-30s. I was a busy mum with 2 small children, and my husband was so alarmed by how unwell I became one sunny Saturday morning that he called his parents, aka our best babysitters ever, and Scott took me to A&E. As it happened, both the doctor and nurse who were on duty that morning were living with migraine disease, and the symptoms I was presenting with were all too familiar to them. They took me into a darkened room, made me comfortable, and put a wafer on my tongue and said, "We'll check in on you in a couple of hours." That was a visit that changed my life. Their expertise, diagnosis, and the prescription of medication enabled me to cope. That was many years ago now. My migraine attacks have eased as I've aged, and I haven't had one for some time now. So thank you for listening. But we know so much more now than we did back then. So to bring us up to speed on everything that's been learned and how it might help us in the future, it's my very great pleasure to welcome our special guests to the stage. Firstly, please welcome Michael Garelja. Michael is a neuroscientist and researcher at Aotearoa University, where he's continuing with promising research that will hopefully lead to new treatments in the future. Welcome, Michael. It's lovely to have you here. Please also welcome Sarah Cahill. Sarah is a freelance medical writer, registered nurse, and former copywriter for the Migraine World Summit team. Sarah is also determined and ambitious, and she is one of the founders of Migraine Foundation Aotearoa, New Zealand, and that's something I can't wait to hear more about, Sarah. Also, please welcome Ros Hill. Ros is an Auckland-based neurologist with special interests in migraine, concussion, brain injury, and autism. Ros is also the independent concussion expert for New Zealand Rugby. And finally, Ray Bose. Ray is an Auckland-based neurologist who specialises in diagnosis, treatment, and management of a range of neurological disorders, and includes external factors like nutrition. We're going to start this evening with a Q&A session, but before we do that, we're going to take a look inside the brain and what special imaging scans are telling us about the causes of migraine attacks. So Ray, would you like to take it from here?
Thank you, Nicole. So hello everyone. I'm going to give you a little bit of a fascinating insight as to what happens in the brain of someone who has a migraine attack. So there are different types of brain scans. You might have heard of a CT scan and an MRI brain scan. And there's a different type of scan called functional imaging scans. The way to compare them would be the CT and MRI brain scans, the normal ones are like a camera, whereas functional imaging scans are like a movie. You can actually track real time what happens in the brain. So for example, this scan is a PET scan. It's a type of functional imaging scan done in patients who have something called a premonitory phase of migraine. So this is a phase just before the headache starts, where people can get symptoms like increased sleep, tiredness, craving for chocolates and things. And what you can see here, different areas like the hypothalamus, the pons, all these areas are already active. So what you see in red is increased activation, or the nerve cells are firing. This is a different type of technology using MRI. I won't go into too much details into the technology, but this is a study that I was involved in. Again, in the premonitory stage of migraine. And what you can see here is different areas. So this is the cingulate cortex, which is the part of the brain that deals with emotions, the regions of hypothalamus. These areas are red. They're firing a lot. There's more blood flow into those regions. And if you look at the back, that's the occipital cortex, and that's blue, which means less blood flow to those regions. And this is all in the premonitory stage. So functional imaging studies allow us to look at what's happening in the brain in real time. So that's very important to understand migraines. Now, with the advent of artificial intelligence, this is going to revolutionize our understanding of migraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. That's a fascinating perspective. Just some follow-up questions now. Can you explain what the most common triggers of migraine attacks are?
So there are a lot of migraine triggers reported. So common ones are stress, environmental changes, neck pain, dehydration, weather changes. So, and what's important to note is that the triggers might be different for different patients. Everyone is very different. So what could be a trigger for one person may not be the trigger for another person.
Is migraine a hereditary condition?
Yes, so predominantly it is a genetic disorder, and there have been lots of genes identified in migraine. But there is one important thing to note though. Just because you have the gene doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to get it, because you might have seen there are people with family members with migraines. Some members get them, some don't. So we're still trying to work out, what are the implications of having those gene mutations and what effect environment has on triggering or not triggering people with those genetic mutations.
Can you explain what role external factors play in migraine attacks?
So external factors like weather changes or hormonal changes, they seem to trigger migraine attacks in people with genetic susceptibility. But I guess what is difficult could be, who gets the trigger and who doesn't. And for example, you might have heard of people getting migraines when they drink red wine, but it doesn't happen to everyone who drinks red wine, and it doesn't happen every time you have red wine. So these can be unpredictable, and there's still a lot of things that we need to learn.
How complex does that unpredictability and uncertainty make your research?
That's interesting. So, anything to do with brain is fascinating, complicated. The brain is for me at least, and I'm sure everyone in this panel too, this is a very complex network, and there are things that we know, a lot of things that we've learned about in terms of brain chemicals, brain scans, clinical syndromes, new treatments. There are a lot of things that we know. But still, it is complex. There are so many things that we don't know, and new technology will help us decipher the brain more and learn more about migraine.
And final question, and Ros, you might like to pick up on this at the end of Ray's response. How does episodic migraine become chronic migraine? And are there things people can do to get out of chronic migraine?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were asking Ros, sorry.
Ros is waiting for you. She's waiting to see what you say first. She's thinking about it.
So, yeah, that's a good question. So, chronification of migraine, it's complicated. There are so many things. So it could be a lot of environmental triggers. For example, if someone's going through a lot of stress in their life, that could contribute to patients having more and more migraine attacks. The other thing is possibly overusing medications. So sometimes taking medications can have a paradoxical effect, and the levels can vary between different drugs. For example, if someone starts taking paracetamol for more than 15 days a month, it can lead to chronification of headaches. If someone took tramadol or codeine or morphine and things like that, maybe taking that more than 10 days a month could lead to chronification of headaches. So there are several things that can lead to migraines moving from episodic to chronic. But what's important to note is that it can go the other way around as well. So if you have chronic migraine, perhaps if you got that treated better, address the environmental factors, then it can go the other way as well.
I'd just like to make a few comments about triggers, because I think people who suffer from migraine feel like if they tried a bit harder, they would be able to figure out what's causing their migraines. But actually that's often incredibly difficult, if not impossible. And the reason for that, I think, is because there are some triggers that are powerful, like women's hormonal fluctuations on a monthly basis. So those are very strong. But I think a lot of the time it's a combination of different things. And so one time it might be these three things, and the next time it might be not those three things, but some other things. So the moment you think you might have got your finger on what's triggering your migraine, then as Ray said, the next time that isn't the case. It's not the red wine. The example I always use for patients is you've had a really busy week. It's been very stressful, you've not been sleeping well, thank God it's Friday, you have a glass of wine, you get a migraine. You blame the wine. But it's actually a combination of things. If you'd had an early night and had your glass of wine on Saturday evening, it wouldn't give you a migraine. So I think it's very difficult, and I don't encourage patients to spend a lot of time and energy trying to find the factors. I think the approach is often more productive if you encourage the person to get good sleep, to eat regular meals. People often say, well, what foods, should I avoid? Well, my policy is eat food regularly. It doesn't matter what the food is. So Ray talked about the premonitory period. So that's the bit before you even get the aura or you get the headache. And it can be 24 hours or even a bit longer when people, as Ray said, feel very tired. Sometimes actually they feel very energetic. Sometimes they yawn a lot, and sometimes they crave chocolate or certain foods. And also that's the time often they're more sensitive to light. So we used to think that light was a trigger. You go outside, the light sort of bounces off the water, bang, and then you get a migraine. But actually you were going to get the migraine anyway. You were already light sensitive. You just didn't notice it until you got struck by that bright light. So there's a lot going on chemically, as Ray's pictures demonstrate, a lot going on chemically in the brain in that very early stage. So I think triggers are something that I feel patients often feel guilty that they haven't figured it out. I say, don't worry. Also, by the time you've come to a neurologist, if you were going to figure out the trigger, you probably would have. So time to stop doing that and focus on all those good, healthy things. Hormones are the only other thing which I think we're going to talk about a bit later, where it's a little bit different.
Thanks for that, Ros. You are a very busy clinician. You wear many hats in the neurological space. What level of patient demand are you seeing for help with migraine disease?
Well, unfortunately, in our current public health system, headaches in general and migraines fall very low on the priority list. I don't know whether it's because they're chronic conditions, as in they're often going on for a long time, as opposed to somebody suddenly developed some numbness or tingling or weakness and you're worried that they've got something more urgent. So unfortunately, headache and migraine almost always gets declined on referral to the hospital. I have to say we've got in Auckland Hospital, well, the neurology department in Auckland, there are 3,000 patients who've been accepted to be seen with no appointments. And of the patients that are referred, probably 50% are declined, and that's not the 1,500 people who are waiting for their follow-up appointments. So the system is very, very clogged. I can say one of the ways that an attempt is being made to improve things is to have very well thought out, comprehensive guidelines for GPs, so that they can actually go to a resource and see, okay, this person's tried this and this, what do I do next? And we're about to launch the new health pathway guidelines. So I'm hoping that that will give GPs guidance, because GPs generally are in a very good position to manage this if they've got good resources they can go to. So it's not a case of your GP is no good, you really need a neurologist. Actually, you don't necessarily need a neurologist, you just need a GP who's listening to you, who can then go and find the right resource that will guide them as to what to do. And I have to take this moment to say the Migraine Foundation, the creation of the Migraine Foundation and their website, which provides really sort of relevant New Zealand information about the drugs that are available and the treatments that are available, gives patients the ability to actually do quite a lot of the work themselves, so they can read about it, look at the Migraine Foundation website, go to their GP and say, look, I've read about this, I would really like to, to try this. A bit like those ads on TV, ask your doctor if this is, appropriate treatment for you. But actually, that is a good way to do it.
Ray, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
I'd just like to echo some of the points from Ross. So Migraine Foundation, thank you very much, for being there and supporting patients. And I too direct patients to Migraine Foundation's website. Before they existed, I used to look at overseas websites for information, and after Migraine Foundation have come, they have transformed the landscape. To give you an example, there was this drug called Aotearoa, which is a new drug that targets something called CGRP, very effective for migraine. And I've been asking so many people, I won't say who, to give me information that I can give out to patients, and it was not forthcoming. But Migraine Foundation put that up on their website, and now I just send that link out to patients, so that's amazing. About neurology in general, we all know that there are resource constraints with the public system. Worldwide, about 30 to 40% of referrals to neurology are headache-related. So few things that I can suggest that could help things would be, like Ross said, GP education, because a lot of the drugs can be actually prescribed by GPs. You don't need a specialist to prescribe sumatriptan injections, for example, or any of the monoclonal antibodies. But I guess you need to know, what are the indications, what are the potential side effects, so that patients can take an informed decision. The other thing is GP education. So I do, whenever I have the opportunity, have discussions with GP or do kind of tele education meetings online. I've had one where there were 400 GPs online. That was fantastic. We can talk about headache and management. So that'll be easier for people to access, because it's harder to access a specialist, as you all know. Also, one thing I just want to talk about is artificial intelligence. It has definitely changed a lot of my practice. So, for example, I used to spend weekends trying to go through results or type up patients' clinic letters. Now it is done, it's almost done instantly. That's freed up my time to see more patients. And I think things like that, technological changes in the public system, would probably help patients.
Yes, let's hope so. Let's hope they get cracking on that. We're going to have a very short discussion now with Ros on Botox. Botox is a much talked about drug with many applications, including for migraine disease. How widely is Botox used as a treatment?
I couldn't say how many patients use it. The issue with Botox, there are a few things. It's been around a long time. Neurologists have used it for treating things that twitch, so typically twitching face around the eye, muscles in the neck that twitch. So neurologists have been injecting it into the muscles for twitching for, 40 or 50 years, right? People who were getting that treatment said, oh, and by the way, that also fixes my headaches. So there were some very big trials done in the US that led to the FDA approval for Botox for chronic headache, migraine in 2010. But those big trials showed that it worked best in patients who had migraine or headache on at least 15 days of the month. But the interesting thing about Botox is since then, it's one of the drugs that the real world experience of the drug is better than the trials looked. And the new drugs that Ray just mentioned, the CGRP drugs, atogepant, they've also been the same. So if you look at the data in the trials, they said they were helpful, but when they were introduced widely and used, they actually look better than the trials suggested. So Botox is unbelievably safe. It's used for a lot of different indications. I won't go through those, but the problem is that in New Zealand we don't have publicly funded, easy access to Botox, and also for those patients who do have private medical insurance, most of the private medical insurers won't fund it. So some of the smaller insurers do. So the big problem with Botox treatment is access for patients to actually have it. The treatment is given every 3 months, and often people need to keep doing it every 3 months. Possibly, I'd say about 50% of people by about 2 years may stop doing it because it's been effective. Like everything, it doesn't work for everybody. Probably works in around about 2/3 of patients. So the wonderful thing about it is it's safe, it's effective in about 2/3 of people, it's one treatment every 3 months, it's not too painful, but the problem is really the access and the cost. That's really the...
Sarah, I'll bring you in here, I think, now. What are patients that you advocate for? What are they? What's your feedback from them on Botox and wanting to access it?
So we get a lot of people in our community emailing us and asking us about Botox, and in our support group, it's asked about a lot. The frustration with not being able to access it through the public health system, a lot of questions about where to go privately. Neurologists will do it privately. There's a 6-month wait list, so we know in our community Botox is a really difficult treatment to access. When I first met Ros as a patient many years ago, I said, what's the one thing that would really help a significant number of people in New Zealand with migraine? And she said funded access to Botox. So it's really frustrating as a patient and as a patient organisation that there's a treatment available that's funded in so many other countries around the world, including Australia, and we don't have it here. It's on our to-do list.
Talking about your to-do list, your advocacy work is so important for patients in this space. With access and funding for new treatments, a key driver for for Migraine Foundation Aotearoa. What is currently happening with Pharmac and getting some of these products and drugs?
So when myself, Fiona and Suzanne started Migraine Foundation in April 2022, one of our key focuses was access and funding of these CGRP medications. We knew that they were available overseas. We knew that no one was asking for them here. So we put an application into Pharmac in November 2022 asking for Garelja to be funded for episodic and chronic migraine. We spent the next couple of years engaging with Pharmac, meeting with them. Our community really got behind our advocacy work, and we got patient stories. We took these to Pharmac and to the decision makers and going, this is the impact of migraine. We need these drugs funded. I don't know if anyone's very familiar with how Pharmac runs, but it's, pretty painful. But we were, I think it was about in December 2023, the PTAC, which is part of Pharmac, came back and took our recommendations, and they said yes, Emgality, Aimovig and Equipta should be funded in New Zealand with the highest priority, which was fantastic. That's what we were aiming for. And then in July last year, we got the good news that all three of them have been put onto Pharmac's options for investment list. The options for investment list is Pharmac's waiting list. Basically, it says, yes, these medications should be funded. We don't have the budget to do it. I think we're only, one of few countries in the OECD that actually have a waiting list. So Pharmac doesn't have enough money to fund these medications, needs more investment from government. Government has given Pharmac $604 million over 4 years. It's not enough to fund them. So we don't know when they get funding. We will continue to advocate for them. You obviously can get these three medications privately, pay for them privately, but yeah, we're still as determined as ever that these medications need to be fully funded in New Zealand.
So can you give any time frame? Do you have any thought as to how long that piece of string is?
No. So we, myself and Fiona, were involved in a couple of workshops in November with Pharmac, with Paula coming on board and kind of looking at the culture of Pharmac, and that's kind of what we said. It's so opaque, we don't know. Like, we have medications, I think it was EpiPens, that sat on the waiting list for 27 years. So that's not going to happen. But we don't know, no. It's on the best list that it can be.
Gosh, it's frustrating, isn't it? Can you tell us what the most commonly accessed and prescribed treatments for migraine are?
Yeah, so we don't have that level of data in New Zealand, basically, because no one has ever looked at it and researched it. But we did, in 2022, when about 5 months after we'd launched, we ran a Migraine in Aotearoa, New Zealand survey. It was the first survey in New Zealand. We got 530 people who responded. Maybe people in the audience responded as well. So we got a bit of a snapshot of what people are taking. Obviously, for acute medications, it was the non-steroidals like ibuprofen and Voltaren and paracetamol and the triptan medications. One interesting thing that came out of this survey for acute medications is there was about, I think, 25% of people weren't taking sumatriptan or triptan when they had an attack, which sumatriptan is just something that you should be prescribed. I know there's probably a few people who can't take it. So that was really, saddening actually, that there was a large population of people who just weren't accessing acute medications. Then we also asked about preventive medications. I mean, as Ray and Rosamund say, it was the antidepressants and antihypertensives. Again, our survey identified that probably about 30% of people who have chronic migraine who were identified weren't on any preventive medication. Again, it's a huge number of people who are just not getting good migraine treatment, effective migraine treatment. There's medications out there. This was before the CGRP medication, so I'm not sure if that has changed. It just showed us that there's a huge gap in people effectively, their migraine disease effectively being managed.
Just to your own personal story now, it takes incredible drive and determination to start a foundation. Can you just give us a brief overview of what started you on that journey?
Yeah, so I live with migraine. I've had migraine most of my adult life. I come from a long line of people with migraine. My mother has migraine, my grandmother, my dad's side of the family, so I probably was always destined to have migraine. It was probably just something that I put up with. It became chronic, so my episodic migraine attacks became chronic after I had 2 children. I had 2 boys when I was aged 30 and 31. And just a few years after, you kind of get through all the, preschool years and everything, I thought, I never have a day that I don't have a headache. If I'm not in a migraine attack, I've never got those crystal clear days. It was about, I think, 2018 that I was just like, maybe I have to take this kind of seriously. And I was very lucky to book in and see Ros. Ros was my neurologist and started me on a few preventives. They worked a little bit, but, I was still kind of living with migraine every day. Then I turned 40, I think as you do, you go, oh, big number, 40. So I went, I really am sick of living with migraine, and so I kind of, went all in, did a deep dive, went down the rabbit hole of all the information that you do. And I realised that there was nothing in New Zealand. I couldn't find really any New Zealand information. There was no charity, there was no support group. It just kind of blew my mind a little bit that there was just nothing, and I knew a lot of people had migraine. So 2020, I'm sure everyone remembers where they were in 2020. So I decided that I was going to start writing a blog. I was a registered nurse. I'm a medical writer. I kind of was just like, look, I'm just going to start writing about the things that I have tried, because I'm learning so much about what I can do for myself. Maybe someone will read my blog and something that they say. So I started writing a blog, and very fortunately, through that blog, I met Fiona and Suzanne, which are other 2 co-founders, and we kind of got chatting and kind of realised if we wanted things to change, these CGRP medications were coming in to anywhere else in the world. We realised no one was asking for them, so we kind of thought, well, if nothing's being done in New Zealand, then maybe we need to do it. I think we were, went in it blindly naive about what it actually meant. But so here we are today, 3 years later. we still, the entire charity we're all volunteers, so we all run the charity as volunteers. We're very fortunate to have 3 more regular volunteers working with us. We've got a clinical advisory group with Ray and Ros and 4 other health professionals. So we've got an incredible volunteer team around us, but yeah, that was short, wasn't it?
That's amazing. Your infrastructure's definitely in place then. Just keep on going. That's very inspiring. Finally, to Michael, our guest researcher, who is another panellist on a very long journey. A first fellowship from the Neurological Foundation set you on a path of exploration. What was your goal and the key takeouts from that period of learning?
Well, firstly, I'd really like to thank the Neurological Foundation for having that trust in me, or willing to take a go on me at the beginning. That was amazing. So I wrote myself to lift so I don't start going on a tangent. So just going to do a little bit of background. So we've heard about CGRP a little bit already. That was where a lot of my research was. So CGRP is what we call a neuropeptide. It's expressed in all the places that we think are important for migraine. And it's thought to be one of the main drivers, or a key driver in migraine for some people. And people who live with a migraine seem to be more sensitive to it than the rest of the population. So that's kind of why we are interested in CGRP. CGRP works by binding to a thing called a receptor. It's kind of like a key in a lock is a classic analogy here. So CGRP, the ligand, or the neuropeptide, binds to a receptor, which is nicely called the CGRP receptor, except it's not nicely called that, because actually, if you go back to the really basic biology, CGRP can actually activate a lot of different receptors. but they get ignored in favour of the one that's called the CGRP receptor. So that is kind of where the Neurological Foundation came in. My question was quite a basic one, really. It was just, there are all these different receptors that CGRP can work on, but we're only thinking about one of them. So let's just look and see in the places where there's CGRP, what receptors are there, and it turns out there's a lot. It turns out there's all sorts of different receptors there that CGRP could be activating. And it's just like a naming convention that's been around for 20 years and it's kind of held us back for 20 years in terms of research. That's everything.
It's amazing. So that research was described as so promising that you and Professor Debbie Hay were subsequently awarded a Marsden grant to continue with your research. What are you and Professor Hay currently focused on?
A lot of what we're doing now is really a continuation of that. So we are still interested in CGRP and we're still interested in its receptors. What we are trying to do is tease out what those receptors are doing and whether different receptors are doing different things. One of the key questions that goes on in CGRP biology is CGRP seems to upregulate itself and make people more sensitive to it over and over again, but they can't explain that with the classical CGRP receptor for reasons that we won't go into now. But we can talk about it if someone wants to come and talk to me later. But yeah, so we're just trying to see, can we explain some of that through those other receptors? So yeah, that is really what we're aiming to do. We're taking from the basic biology, trying to take that through to real clinical understandings. And I also really quickly want to add, something we're going to talk about a little bit later, or I will bring up a little bit later maybe, is there's a new target called PACAP that's coming through clinical trials at the moment, and we've just been able to recruit like a world-leading researcher on PACAP, and named Zoe Tasman, and she's amazing. And so she's just joined the lab about 6 months ago, and so while we don't have anything formal on that, it's something that we would love to keep going on.
And what does the addition of her on the team, what does that mean in terms of where you're going, your capability, just having another person you respect on board?
Yeah, it's really easy to get pigeonholed. It's really easy. It's so hard to keep up with everything that's going on. So having someone else who's looking at something in parallel to you, but equally important, it's great. It means that in the future we can kind of start to look at the crosstalk between them or start to look at them individually. It's really cool, hopefully. Yeah.
That's great. Just tell me, Michael, what are the areas of greatest potential benefit and payoff for migraine research, in your view?
So in my potentially biased view...
it's allowed.
Yeah. So both CGRP and PACAP are neuropeptides. So I think there's a lot of scope for neuropeptides research. So we've got these new CGRP drugs that are out. We're getting a good understanding. Like Ros said, we're getting better results than in the clinical trials, but there's still a lot we don't know about them. So as we get more understanding about them, that will be useful. PACAP is the second one. As we get more understanding about that and see it come through clinical trials, that'll be great. And just like in a very broad sense, we know that there are these regions of the brain and outside the brain that are important, and they're filled with these neuropeptides and different receptors, and really, in theory, any of those could be a target. So we have a lot of things that we could be researching, and we're just really scratching the surface at the moment.
Gosh, I'm so glad we've got people like you to do all that research. Just finally, what have researchers learnt recently that helps us better understand the cause of migraine disease?
So I think this is another thing that has kind of already been mentioned, is that not everyone's going to be having the same migraine, and we kind of have this box that is migraine. And it is great because it allows people to come together and find each other, but in all likelihood it's probably a few different things adding up to have a similar effect, but not quite the same effect. Like some people get aura, some people don't. So I think there's been a little bit of change in the research that I look at, and this is, people starting to think about why are there these differences. So just to keep on that CGRP PACAP thing, some people get migraine. Some people who have migraine and live with migraine have a migraine attack in response to CGRP, and some people will have the same thing with PACAP, but it's not necessarily the same people. So these could be independently driving some of those migraine attacks. So yeah, kind of breaking that down, those boxes, to do a little bit more personalised work is going to be great. There's a big thing about inflammation at the moment, and so that's kind of why some people have seasonal migraine attacks in response to hay fever and things like that. Again, very early days. And one that is so obvious and it is ridiculous. I feel bad saying this out loud, actually.
Go ahead.
But,
get it off your chest.
We know that migraine skews female in humans, and yet all the basic studies are done in male animals or male people, and so just it's silly. Yeah,
Ross, would you like to pick up there?
No, I was going to say, it's a well-known phenomenon that almost all the studies for anything are done in white men.
So just taking that into account is it's
European white men.
This shouldn't be groundbreaking, but it kind of is. And
Do
so
we need
there's
to start a movement on that one, do you think?
and then, so there's work showing that female rodents are more sensitive, exhibit more migraine-like behaviours in response to PACAP and CGRP than their male counterparts. Yet all the studies are done in male mice. It's silly.
Is there any sort of movement to change that, though, within the medical world?
So I actually, just on a broad, I can talk to mine and then everyone else can talk to it, but I just had a friend of mine say, I was listening to this podcast. Did you know that they're all doing all this work in male mice? That's silly. And so I was like, yeah, so people are starting to think about it now, but
It's taken a while.
taking a while.
Ross, do you have any other comments? Okay. Ray, do you have any comments?
Yeah, that's very interesting, Michael. So just a few things. So the new developments in migraine, so there are a lot of these new neuropeptides, so chemicals that are involved in migraine, CGRP, PACAP, orexin, amylin, acid sensing, ion channels. So a lot of neuropeptides being studied. There are a lot of imaging studies going on, so looking at different parts of the brain which are being fired, and that will give us understanding of which areas of the brain are involved in migraine process, how to target those areas, how to switch them off, how to monitor therapy, and of course all these new drugs. So CGRP is a big thing. Before CGRP came, Botox was the final word. For a long time, Botox was what you gave when nothing else worked. But beyond Botox, now we have CGRP treatments. There's been a recent study with PACAP targeting molecule, and that was effective. So it'll be interesting to see in the future combination therapy. So at the moment, we sometimes combine CGRP and Botox for difficult to treat patients. It might be a future of PACAP and CGRP being combined. So it's all interesting, and a lot of new changes and discoveries being made all the time.
Thanks for that, Ray. That brings our Q&A session to a close. Thank you so much, panel, for all your contributions. There's been so much to absorb here so far that I'm going to take a little check-in with our audience. So, audience, you are an incredibly attentive group, I've noticed. How's everyone going out there? Can you give us a wave, thumbs up? Is everybody comfortable? Everybody happy? Oh, that's excellent. I'm very pleased about that. And panel, how are you all? Everyone's comfortable? Thumbs up? Great. We're going to proceed with a panel discussion very shortly, but first our panellists are each going to each going to respond to a request from a member of our audience who's asked you to please share your top brain health tip. So who'd like to go first?
About diet. Diet is very important for neurological illnesses. So it's important to have a balanced diet and avoid ultra-processed food. One thing that I'd like to touch upon is gut microbiome. Most of you might have heard of that concept. So increasingly we are being aware of gut microbiome being involved in various neurological illnesses, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, migraine. The brief explanation of that is our gut has got good bacteria and bad bacteria, and depending on your diet, that influences which one goes up. So having ultra-processed food would push the bad bacteria up. We haven't found out a good way of targeting that, but I would say healthy, balanced diet is good for brain health.
Mine is sleep. Yeah, a few nods of the head there. I mean, if any of my friends were probably to describe me, they'd go, she's the one who likes to sleep. But it really is, I've learnt, I mean, in terms of migraine, I've learnt that my migraine brain likes routine, and so that includes sleep as well, and eating and everything. So I guess the two things that I prioritise for my brain are sleep and just to make sure I exercise. Just getting out for a walk, not running marathons or anything like that, but just, getting out, do a bit of yoga, walk 20 minutes. It just, for me, that's a huge help for my migraine brain.
Michael, what's your top tip?
It's going to look like we've been comparing notes. Sleep and exercise. Ray was telling us before we started about why sleep is so important, and it was to help getting rid of toxins. And I've already forgotten the second one. Emotional and physical well-being. And like from a personal, I can only speak personally, if you don't sleep well, I always wake up with a terrible headache or I'm just in a bad mood. So sleeping and exercise.
I won't mention the sleeping and exercise thing. I do though, I'm going to talk very briefly, one thing I feel is really important is stress. And stress, I always feel, is like this huge black cloud that sort of sits above us, and it's a very sort of amorphous thing. Well, everybody has stress, and it's like, well, you need to manage your stress. Well, what do you do about managing your stress? So my 30-second thing about stress, which I find helpful, is so identifying the things that are causing stress. And I usually, because I like writing lists, because I've got ADHD and I can never remember what I'm supposed to be doing. So identify what it is that is causing you stress. And so you write a little list, then you divide it into two groups. Things you can do something about and things you can do nothing about. So you'll know the things you can do nothing about because they're the things you think about in the middle of the night. When you wake up, you start on one of those things and that leads you in this horrible sort of cycle into the other things that you worry about, and they're all the awful things you can do nothing about. So it's important not to think about those things, because if you can do nothing about them, thinking about them is just bad for you. So the things you can do something about, what are you going to do? Talk to this person, say no to that invitation, do whatever. So these are the things I'm worrying about. What do I need to do? And usually they're things you're just putting off. And you know what you need to do, you just put them off. So do those things. The other things, these are the things you can do nothing about. Do not think about them. And then you've got to come up with strategies so that you recognise when your brain goes there, because it does. It goes to those things you're worrying about. And often they're things to do with other people, loved ones, their health, what's going... If you can't do anything about it, you need to recognise, nope, I'm not thinking about that, and find something to replace it with. But I think if you can identify that these things you are worrying about, you can't fix, then I think that's helpful. So I find that saying, yep, stress is important, but you need a little bit more, and that's kind of the way I approach it is, what are they? Do what you need to do about those things. Do not think about the things that you have no control over.
Thank you, Ros. I'm going home to ring fence my stress. We're going to move on to a very general discussion now with our panel on a couple of issues that are topical in the public mindset. The first is neuroscience itself. Are we more curious about neuroscience and what it means? And are we more curious about our brains and how we are or aren't caring for them? Ray, you told me that as a young medical graduate 20 years ago, you had the choice between specialising in paediatrics or neurology. And neurology was seen as a scary subject among some of your colleagues at med school. Why do you think that was?
I think for medical students worldwide, doesn't matter, New Zealand, England, everywhere, neurology was thought to be so complicated because the brain was thought to be complicated. There were so many complicated syndromes in neurology. Neurologists love syndromes, you know. So I used to see that, and but the thing was like I was interested in challenges, and a lot of neurological conditions. My professor used to tell me back in the days that patients don't always read the textbook, so they don't come with all the boxes ticked. And I used to find that very fascinating, and that kind of drove me into neurosciences. And then after I got into neurology, I realized migraine is something that was under-resourced, you know. There were not that many people working in the field of migraine, and it was a challenging problem. Looking at neurology lists, 30% of the cases were migraine-related, but number of doctors who wanted to do headache as a career were limited. So that, and also all the technologies that I got exposed to, that all pushed me into neurosciences, and I'm sure Michael and Ross would have things to add as well.
Yeah, Ross, we'll start with you. How have you found your way into neuroscience and neurology? I mean, was it...
It's genetic.
Genetic. Oh, okay.
My father was a neurologist. Well, actually, he was a pharmacist to start with, and then he trained in neurology in South Africa. And there were no neurologists, actually, in South Africa. And actually, he spent a year doing, as a pathologist, he loved telling me this, 680 postmortems. And that was how he sort of understood the brain. So he did that for a year. And then we went to Oxford for a year when I was early at school. So we spent a year in Oxford for him, and then we went back to South Africa, and then we went to Edinburgh for a year. And then we went back to South Africa, and then we moved to New Zealand. But, you know, he was absolutely fascinated by the brain. And I think if you have a parent who's absolutely into what they're doing, you know, that's why I think sometimes you'll see families with lawyers that runs in the family or accountants. It's because if the parents are passionate about what they're doing, that rubs off on the child. Though my daughter has said she's not going into the family business. She's training to be a surgeon, so I don't know what went wrong, but yeah. I was saying before when we were talking about neuroscience, I think one of the things about neurology is that years ago it was perceived that there were a lot of neurological diseases with no treatment. So people felt like that in many ways it was a depressing subject because there are diseases that nobody can do anything about. And I think that is definitely changing. And some of the big changes are going to be in areas like Alzheimer's disease, where I'm confident there are going to be treatments that are going to fix it. So I think that just the sort of growth in genetics, immunology, and new drugs that are coming through, I think people are far more excited, both scientists and medical doctors, to actually go into neurology. I think it's had a bad rep for many years as, you know, well, you don't want to do that, it's really depressing, which it isn't.
So, Michael, what do you think of the bad rap idea? It's clearly much more popular now, is it?
I have come to neuroscience sideways. I was scared of it. I was so scared of it as a student at university.
Why?
For all the reasons that we were just talking.
Listed above.
Yeah. And so then I was a cell biologist. I loved receptors. I thought they were cool. I just said that out loud.
We liked it.
And by accident, I was working with, waste of time, I was working on a receptor that was in the heart, just a pump. And then its cousin is CGRP, and that's how I've ended up here, and I feel very lucky to be here. It's really great seeing impact. Like, it makes it feel like it's worthwhile. I know that it gets thrown around, but it's really cool. But yeah, I was scared of neuroscience, and I don't think it's as scary now.
You faced your fear.
I faced my fear.
That's amazing. The second topic that we're going to discuss tonight is one that is of societal concern, particularly to parents, and it's about technology and our increasing dependency and use of screens and digital devices. Panel, what do we know, and should we be worried about the impact of screen time?
That's a very interesting question. So I guess with children, things can easily influence their brain development. So with spending times on mobile devices and screen devices, I think it's important not to demonize the technology itself. So it might be useful as part of their development, keeping them engaged. I think it becomes a problem when they are solely focused on that, and then it starts affecting their sleep or social interaction within family members, not making any friends. Then it's a problem. But otherwise, I think it should be encouraged. But one point I would like to make is children see adults as role models. And I have been to some households with children, and I've seen like the parents tell, "You spend too much time on the phone, get off from it," and then the parents are texting away. So I guess adults are role models for children, and I think if they set a healthy standard, then the children would follow.
I have a son who has migraine. Those genes just keep on going. But it's not just my fault. Migraine is also on my husband's side of the family. It's missed him, but my brother-in-law, sister-in-law, and father-in-law also have migraine. So my eldest son, who is 14, has migraine. I'm probably reasonably strict with phones and devices, but what I do notice is he plays a lot of sport, and sport is a massive trigger for him. He's on the soccer pitch a million hours a week, and he goes 100%, and so we load him up with electrolytes. He saw Ros one day. Ros gave him permission to drink a can of Coke after his soccer game, so he does that all the time. His younger brother hates it, who doesn't have migraine. But I do notice when he has that tendency to come off soccer pitch, he's drunk his Coke and he's eaten. Sometimes there's a little bit of a pain there. Mum, can I just go play PlayStation for an hour? And that hour and a half turns in, he comes back red face. Oh, I've got a really sore head. So I don't know the science behind it, but I just think, if you're sitting there playing FIFA and your child's brain is already predisposed to migraine, and then you've got these things for an hour and a half, it's probably not best. No science behind that. Maybe you guys can share some more science in that.
Ros, what are your thoughts?
I can't really comment on the science of it, but I think probably like lots of technology, there's good and bad in it. But I have a lot of anxiety about a lot of screens in very young children. And also just with the social development, I have as Nicole said, I am interested in autism. I've got a severely autistic son, and I just think that the social development, a lot of that comes from watching other children and what they do, and spending a lot of time on one screen on your own means you're not observing how other children are behaving and what they're doing. So I'm sure when children need some downtime, it's a very pleasant way for everybody for them to have a bit of peace and quiet, and there are a lot of amazingly educational apps and programs and things. So I suspect it comes down to how much time the child is spending on it and at what age. But I think my understanding is from the developmental paediatrician data, it's not good a lot at a young age. So I think if I was starting again, I'd say, limit it in the young children and then introduce it slowly, but limit the amount of time. But I certainly wouldn't say no screens. I think it's a matter of trying to get the balance right between the benefit and it not being too much.
And what would you define as young in that limitation?
Under the age of 5, but I think that it's the under age 2, I think, where, you just prop the baby. I mean, I know when I would have a shower, I'd pop the baby in the thing looking at that while I'm having a shower, but that's like, okay, that's fine. But I think spending any length of time looking at screens in a small child, I'd be very anxious, yeah.
And are you aware of any studies that are being done?
I'm an adult neurologist, so I'm not, and my Claude, my autistic son, is now 21, so I've kind of not really kept up with the sort of paediatric end of things. But my understanding is that there are studies and data that suggest it's not great in a very young child, that we should be limiting the amount of screen time in a small child. Yeah, I think so.
Any further comments on screen time?
Just adding on from Ross here, absolutely. When it's a young child, I think it's important, and there are studies that show that. Just two other things I want to mention is screen time can, especially if you're watching it towards bedtime, it can affect melatonin production in the brain, so it can disrupt your sleep. And again, when you're active on your mobile phone, your brain is active, and it takes a little bit of time to switch off. So sleep can get disrupted, and sleep is very important. So that's just one thing I wanted to add.
Okay, thank you very much, panel. That's the end of our discussion. It's time for your questions now. And I'd like to thank everybody who has submitted questions this evening during registration. We'll start with the submitted questions, and then we'll move on to live questions from the audience shortly. We'll try to answer as many as we can, but please bear in mind that we have limited time. The first question we're going to direct to you, Ros. Do you have any tips to manage migraine disease during hormonal changes such as premenopause or menopause, especially when inflammation is a factor? What if someone has undergone a hysterectomy or something similar?
Yeah, so hormonal things are a very important factor, and the problem is that when women go into perimenopause, they don't really notice anything because their periods are still nice and regular, but behind the scenes, your hormones are much more up and down. So there's a feedback between your ovaries and your brain. So firstly, if you have a hysterectomy, no problem, as long as they leave your ovaries behind. So hysterectomy is not going to help one way or the other. It's only your ovaries that are important. So your ovaries are what produce the estrogen. And what causes the problem for lots of women who have what we call menstrually triggered migraine is the fluctuations, particularly in the estrogen. So when you're postmenopausal, all the hormones, your ovary hormones are sort of at the floor, and your brain hormones are high and steady. When you're going through perimenopause, the hormones are up and down because your ovaries are failing. They're coming to the end of their active life, so they stop producing estrogen. So the feedback to your brain hormone levels go right up, like pressing on the accelerator pedal. So they go up. Then the ovaries do a bit better for a while. And so everything comes back to normal. Then the ovaries start to fizzle out, and the brain. So instead of having this kind of small fluctuations through your reproductive life, from often about age 40, the hormone fluctuations are much greater. And that's when women often who've had occasional migraines will now get very problematic migraines. That's the one thing. The other thing is you've got to figure out whether you have menstrually triggered migraines. Now, sometimes it's very clear because they only come in the week before your period or the beginning of your period, but you don't get them the rest of the month. But sometimes you get them at other times of the month. So sometimes you have to answer that question first. Keep some records, look closely and see, is ovulation a problem for your for your migraines? And then often what we'll try and do is stop the ovulation. Because if you can make the hormone steady, then you can often eliminate quite a lot of the very difficult to treat migraines, because the ones that come around the time of your period are often the worst and the hardest to treat. So it's the whole sort of challenge of women's hormones is a kind of a from when your periods start till when you're postmenopausal, all through those years, it's often important to look at what's going on with the hormones. What people don't realise is that when the oral contraceptive pill was developed, they developed it so that you take it for 3 weeks and then you have a week of sugar pills. And that was to try and get the Catholic Church to accept that women could take the pill. So they could say, look, every month they have a period. But you don't need that. It's not actually a period. You're not ovulating. It's what's actually technically called a withdrawal bleed. You only bleed because you stop taking the pill and you're taking the sugar pills. So you can actually just take the regular pills constantly and don't have that break. And that's only something that's become sort of apparent more recently, and so that young women can now just take the pill, run the packets together, have no periods, and therefore don't get those menstrually triggered migraines. There are lots of other ways to stop ovulation, but that's often really important. Menopause, your ovaries are not producing the usual amount of estrogen. That's what gives you the hot flushes and the night sweats and the brain fog and other things. So for some women, if you give them back some estrogen, they feel a lot better, and the migraines are a lot better. So that's often the big decision, is whether this person would benefit from HRT and what they need. So it is a complicated area. And I will sometimes send patients to see the reproductive endocrinologist, which is a specific specialty, to try and organise what are you going to do, what can we do in terms of the hormones. The problem is also that what works well for some women will aggravate things for somebody else. So you've got to personalise it for that actual individual person as to what you are going to do to their hormones that is going to be helpful. Sorry, that's rather a long-winded answer.
Thanks, Ros. Lots of air travellers get severe headaches when they're flying. What's your advice on that, Ray?
That's a very good question, whoever raised it. So air travel, people get headaches. It's actually quite common. More than 100 million people over the world, because of the frequent air travel, get that. Now, two things can happen. One is people with pre-existing history of migraine, due to the atmospheric pressure changes, they can get a migraine attack on the plane. But another common reason why they get it is something called airplane headache. And this is because our sinuses, within our skull, have air in them. You might have seen when your plane's landing, if you've got like a bottle, it'll start shrinking. So air inside our skull can expand or contract depending on if you're taking off or landing. And these pressure changes can cause headaches. Now, how do you manage it? One thing, if you suffer from migraine, you can take a triptan, rizatriptan, half an hour before the flight takes off, or you can keep nasal decongestant drops with you. They are, quite handy. I've had cabin crew who have airplane headache, and that can be quite tricky because there's only a certain number of triptans you can take in a day. And for them, then they have to go to an ENT specialist to have their sinuses dilated.
Thanks, Ray. We've also had a number of questions about non-prescribed options. We've had questions on the use of vitamins and beta blockers, and people are also keen to hear your thoughts on CBD oil. Who'd like to go first in response to that?
There are a lot of non-pharmacological agents that can be used. I mean, traditionally, vitamins have been tested. There are some old studies where things like vitamin B and coenzyme Q10, these things can be quite useful. Magnesium can be useful. So if people want to try something non-medication related, I suggest that you can try that. Cannabis is interesting. So cannabis works, when we talk about cannabis, it's THC and CBD. and they work on two receptors. So there are two endocannabinoid receptors, CBD1 and CBD2. I think in the future, it'll probably be an area where there'll be more drugs. Currently, the problem is, one, there are so many formulations. It's not, quality control. So a product from one company might not act the way this product from another company works. And a lot of it is observational studies, not that many randomized controlled trials, actually comparing the drug with placebo. There was one study where they studied vaporized cannabis. So you inhale the cannabis during an acute attack. And they studied THC, did not work. CBD did not work. Then a combination of THC and CBD worked. So I'm not sure how that came about. So I think it is promising, but we are not there yet, I think.
A lot of patients ask about CBD, and as Ray said, because it's illegal to do trials, it's not federally approved in the US, it's just certain states. So basically, there've never been really any decent trials for most conditions, because a lot of people ask about it for epilepsy as well. My opinion, for what it's worth, I think that it's generally helpful for anxiety and for sleep. And often if you help anxiety and sleep, you'll help a whole lot of other things. There are definitely some people who feel it's very helpful for their pain directly. The data doesn't, and that we do have, and the science doesn't support that as much. But if it helps anxiety and sleep, then one would expect it's going to help pain. When patients ask me about it, I have no problem if they want to try it. Seems to be quite expensive, I have to say. So if you're going to spend money on something, I would definitely encourage people to spend it on the proven new drugs for migraine rather than CBD and THC. But I don't think it's at all unreasonable. But I always suggest people go to a doctor in one of the clinics who's experienced, who, as Ray said, there's lots of different preparations, who will be able to give you good advice about which sort to use. But like any treatment, if you give it a try and it doesn't work, then don't keep doing it. Yeah.
Thank you, Ros. Question for you, Sarah. What are your thoughts on ensuring equitable work accommodations for staff with migraine disease? And what jobs would you consider ideal for those with migraine?
I think people with migraine can do anything. I mean, I work with a team of incredible women. We all have migraine. We're pretty resilient. And we don't take for granted our health. We don't know, I don't know when my next migraine attack is, so those days that I have a clear head, I'm really productive. I guess shift work, I used to be a nurse, work shift work, it wasn't good for my head, so, personal experience, I don't think shift work is very good. I think it's about being flexible. I think it's, it's like anything, it's, I guess, with, parents, everyone's very capable of being productive, but they just might need a little bit of flexibility, better knowledge and education in the workplaces, actually people recognising that migraine is a neurological condition. It's not just a headache and you say, I've got a headache, so you can get off work for the afternoon. So I think anything. I mean, we are doing a bit of a project about workplace webinars in education, so we just need a bit more, some funding to get it off the ground. But I think probably just anything flexible.
That's great. Michael, what's on the horizon about research and treatment that's cause for optimism?
We kind of touched on it a little bit. This PACAP drug that's coming through, I struggle with which phase of the clinic. It's 2A, I think it's just gone through with positive. So that is the close horizon. In the slightly further away horizon, there are a couple of other sort of receptor-based things that are coming through development, starting those clinical trials. So hopefully, sometime soon, we're going to have some new drugs coming through, and then we can start the process of trying to get New Zealand to fund those as well. And then the co-therapies, like I think Ray brought up before, really big disclosure is that these are all like case studies, but people are starting to mix these CGRP medications together, and we don't know why it's working better than by themselves, but sometimes, again, individuals, sometimes it does work better if you're putting two together rather than just having one by themselves. So that's my opinion. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Just, Ros, are you able to give briefly some advice on Rosamund for those who've used their monthly prescription before the end of the month? Are there any alternatives?
No, so if you are a person who has migraine that requires taking a triptan, which, as you probably, if you know about migraine, is the triptans are the only drugs actually designed for migraine that are funded in New Zealand, and there are about 8 of them, I think, in total, but we only have 2 of them, rizatriptan and sumatriptan. So they are specifically designed for migraine. So, but they cannot be taken more than 10 days in the month. Not 10 doses, but 10 days in the month. Sometimes people will take them more than once in a day. If you are experiencing migraine that requires you to take something like that, 10 days or more a month, you need your preventive treatment looked at. Because basically, treating migraine when it comes, there are 4 different sort of families of drugs we use. Good old paracetamol, not actually a particularly great drug on its own for migraine, but sometimes adds a little bit. Paracetamol with caffeine, often quite good, that's the can of Coke. The second category are your anti-inflammatories or aspirin, and that varies from person to person as to which one you find effective, and you need to make sure you're using the big enough dose. And then you've got the triptans, and then you've got an anti-nausea drugs. So some of the anti-nausea drugs have a bit of anti-migraine activity, but also if you're nauseated, even if you're not vomiting, it can slow down the absorption of the other drugs that you're trying to take for the headache. So often you're better with some anti-nausea drug. That's it, basically. And about 80%, probably, I would say, of patients would respond to a triptan. They may not respond to the wafer, rizatriptan, or the injection, the tablet, but the injection. So I think there are a lot of people who would benefit from the injection, which is, it's like an EpiPen you give to yourself, that I think it's probably underused. We don't like opioids at all, any of them. So the opioids are codeine, tramadol, oxynorm, oxycodone. Those drugs are not appropriate for chronic pain conditions. So the pain specialists say you should not use those drugs in non-malignant chronic pain conditions. So yes, they work. Obviously they work. They're opioids. They will work for all sorts of pain, but you will be heading into a whole lot of trouble in terms of the long-term issues. And they can sensitise the pain as well. So we don't go, well, if the rizatriptan doesn't work, just take a stronger drug. What you need to look at then is, okay, your preventive treatment is not doing a good enough job, or if you're not on preventive treatment, you need to. Because fundamentally, you need to be having fewer headaches, less than 10 days a month, rather than stronger drugs to treat them. It says your migraine's needs to be reviewed and see what changes could be made to your management. You agree, Ray?
Just going to check in with managers now. Do we have time for some audience questions now? Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. We're fast running out of time in this information in this information bath that we're in. So to audience questions now. Thank you so much for your patience. It's been a very long wait. The Neurological Foundation's fabulous team members, Kelly and Keely, are standing by with microphones. So would you please raise your hand if you have a question?
Hi, this is just a question for my friend here. With the trials that you have been doing, what kind of symptoms or side effects have you been finding with your trials?
Our trials are much more basic. We're very on like even more basic than like an animal model, but I can talk to what other people have seen. So generally, I can talk more about CGRP and its like cousins than everything else. CGRP, as well as this migraine thing, does have profound cardiovascular effects and does also have gastrointestinal things. So that's one of the most common side effects of the current anti-CGRP drugs is like it can be quite severe gastrointestinal constipation. Yeah. I mean, someone who was doing these CGRP studies and they see that it just smells terrible when they are giving it to rats. I'm not going to paint the picture. So those are the real common ones. And it's really hard to tell from like case studies when somebody says, we gave them this anti-CGRP medication and all of a sudden they had a heart attack. Like, were they going to have the heart attack anyway? Adding to this, absolutely not a physician, did my best to get out of anatomy as soon as I could. I don't know, has that answered some of the question? With the other ones, it's generally a similar thing. A lot of these new neuropeptides that they're looking at are, whether it's coincidence, whether it's like part of the mode of action, they're really good at vasodilation. So a lot of them do have that like little cardiovascular risk. It hasn't really eventuated in the clinic, but that was the big worry that what people had when they were going in.
I'll just add, because we have about 1,600 people in our support group, and obviously Emgality has been a big discussion. I think I've been on Emgality myself for 2.5 years, and it's been fine. And I think most of the side effects that people report is constipation. I think that's the main thing, and sometimes not tolerating it, too much nausea. I think that's pretty much the two in our population of people that we connect with. So,
Is there a question over there?
Is trigeminal neuralgia a form of migraine? And the question following from that, is there any cure from it? Because I suffer terribly from it.
So trigeminal neuralgia is a distinct kind of condition. So we have something called an international headache classification for different pain disorders. So migraine comes separate and trigeminal neuralgia is separate. So broadly speaking about trigeminal neuralgia, there are treatments. So first line would be to try medical treatments. And so there are quite a few drugs. So carbamazepine is one of them. Lamotrigine is one of them. You can actually give Botox to the branch of the trigeminal nerve. And if these measures fail, then I usually ask a neurosurgery colleague to do an operation. Essentially, the operation would be to kind of dissect the nerve, and that usually works. But you try the medical treatments first.
Do we have another question?
Any new knowledge on vestibular migraine?
Good question. So vestibular migraine isn't something that we were really aware about until quite recently. So previously we didn't think you got vestibular disturbance really with migraine. And by that we mean like dizziness. And the dizziness can either be part of the aura. So 80 to 90% of people probably don't get aura. A small percentage of people get an aura. And the commonest aura is a visual aura. And sometimes with that, people have some expressive language difficulties, and they can have some pins and needles down one side usually. But you can get dizziness as part of the aura, or sort of disequilibrium like you're on a boat. So you can either have it as part of the aura, but it's become clear recently that you can have dizziness instead of the headache, or dizziness with a little bit of headache, or dizziness sometimes with a little bit of headache and other times not. And the dizziness can be any sort of dizziness. So it can be dizziness that's triggered by turning your head, and then getting spinning, or it can be dizziness that's just there and can last for days or weeks. So it's an extremely broad definition. Technically, you're supposed to have headache half of the time, but sometimes the people are so bothered by the dizziness they don't really notice if they've got a mild headache. But we don't really know exactly what's going on, and it's treated in the same way mostly as we treat migraine, with the same drugs, triptans and preventive drugs. But I think we are realising that it's a lot more common than people had previously thought. Ray, do you want to come?
Yeah, so one problem with vestibular migraine is it's very rare, so not many trials have focused on that. So like Ross said, we use a combination of other treatments that we use in migraine. There's some promising studies coming on CGRP, monoclonal antibodies and antagonists working for that. There's one study about gamma core, which is a neuromodulation device. So it's a handheld device that you stimulate the vagus nerve that can be effective for it. Overseas, I had good results with a drug called flunarizine, but unfortunately, that's very hard to source in New Zealand. So yeah, I completely understand. It's a rare problem and unfortunately not well studied.
Hi, I just want to find out if you can give us any advice for the day after the headache. I just find the older I'm getting, the worse it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. When Ray was talking about the premonitory phase, so that's the bit before the aura, then you've got the aura, then you've got the headache, then you've got, now people are really far more aware of what's technically called the postdrome, or most people call the migraine hangover, and that can last a day or two, and that often has a really big impact. I think often the triptans are not so useful for that, and that's when I would be more likely to be using your regular Panadol and anti-inflammatories, because people are often trying to stop it at the beginning, so they focus all their treatment at the beginning, and then they stop taking it regularly all the way through. So I think it's important to take the regular Panadol or anti-inflammatories right through that last day or two when you're feeling pretty lousy. I don't think there's anything magic or special. Ray, have you got any ideas?
So that's interesting. So post-drome phase of migraine, that's what my doctorate was on. I was imaging people during that phase to understand what's happening in their brain. We are yet to publish that, but I can tell you what we saw. It was almost like the whole brain was switching off. So the whole brain was blue, which meant that the neurons were all shutting down. Like Ross said, we haven't devised any way to, restart or kickstart. So that particular phase. So at the moment, the strategy would be to treat the migraine itself, so you get less migraine and less post-drome.
There's a lady down the back who's been waiting by the Lena. Do you still have a question? Could we please take her microphone? Thank you.
I was just really curious to get your opinion about, we're talking about drugs and preventative drugs, something like, it's just gone out of my brain, the needles, acupuncture. What your opinions are of that?
So acupuncture is interesting. When people tell me they want to try something non-drug related, go ahead. One thing to bear in mind with acupuncture is it depends on who does them. It's highly variable, the results. So when they did, comparisons of different studies, they compared them all together. It was kind of 50-50.
There have, over the years, there's been lots of interest in acupuncture, and there've been stages when there'd be like a study would come out that would say it's helpful. Everybody go, oh yeah, that's good, and then the next study would come out and say it's useless, and so everybody, oh no, we don't do that anymore. So it has been around a long time, and it's swung around a lot. What I would say is it's safe. A lot of the, and it's perfectly reasonable to do, and it possibly does help some people. There are a lot of allied health things that people spend a lot of time and money to try and treat their migraines, especially lots of physios and things that people do. And I think my advice is always reasonable to give it a try, but make it a short trial. And if it helps, great, and keep doing it. If it doesn't, stop doing it. Because I suspect there are some people that certain things will help and other people it doesn't. So it's reasonable to give it a try. But it's not on my list of things that I say to patients, you should try, you should do this and you should do that. But I think if someone's recommended a good acupuncturist, the same as people go, well, should you do physio or see an osteopath? I think it depends on the practitioner. There are people who just have good hands, who just are experienced and they're helpful. So I think it's not so much whether it's a cranial osteopath or a physio. Is this a person who is experienced and good at what they do? That's more important, I think, than the modality of treatment. And also, I have no doubt that spending relaxing time, having somebody do whatever they're going to do, stick some needles in, massage your feet, is, for a lot of people, you're doing something for yourself, like, sorry, I'm going out, I'm off to my appointment, and you're there for longer than the GP and more frequently than the specialist. There's therapeutic benefit, I think, in all of that, whether it's the actual needles or whether it's actually the process of somebody caring and listening and the time you are actually doing something for yourself. I think that's a big factor and not to be underestimated.
We are very nearly out of time, so could we make it brief, please? This is our last question.
I hope I can make it brief. I'm just wondering, how do you think we can combat different misconceptions people may have about migraine disease? It can be brief, yeah.
Be one for you, Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. There are many misconceptions about migraine. Your question is, what can we do? I think, like raising awareness, getting people more aware. Migraine, in my eyes, migraine wasn't talked about for a long time. Migraine was just something that I had, and then when I went out and I saw that there was no migraine charity, there was no, nothing in New Zealand, I was just like, well, do I actually have a condition? And so I think it's just getting the conversation started. You look at workplaces, and workplaces are talking about menopause now. Like, workplaces should be talking about migraine because it affects, women of working age the most. So I think it's just raising awareness. It's, I had a GP that I met a few weeks ago who tried to tell me that if I gave up chocolate, it might help migraine. This was after my friend had said she runs a migraine charity. It's those sort of things. So I think we really got to, as a community, really start talking about migraine. I mean, you probably hear us talking not about migraines. Those of us who have been with us for a long time know that we talk about migraine disease and migraine attacks. I think that language really works when you go, I get migraines, but when they go away, my brain is fine. Your brain's not fine. You have a disease. You've got migraine disease. You have migraine attacks. So I don't think it's an easy answer, but I think just more awareness and talking with people and like telling colleagues not to call on a Monday morning with a migraine because they're hungover, because it doesn't help us. So it's not an easy answer, but I think the more we talk about it and the more awareness there is, the recognition that it all hopefully helps. That's our hope anyway.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughtful questions and contributions this evening. We're nearly out of time, but our panel is staying for refreshments, so please feel free to join us and have a chat with any questions you still have. It's now my very great pleasure to welcome Rich Easton, the Neurological Foundation's CEO, to the stage. Welcome, Rich.
Thank you, Nicole, for that kind introduction. And thank you all for being here tonight. It's been such an interesting and insightful evening, and really proud of the collaboration between the Migraine Foundation, Aotearoa, and the Neurological Foundation being able to bring this event to you tonight. So my role is really to say some thank yous. And firstly, a huge thank you to our panel tonight. So for Ray and for Sarah, for Michael, for Ros, and for Nicole for guiding us through such an interesting exploration about some of the challenges, some of the insights, and the pathway of hope in the future to perhaps understanding more about migraine and possible treatments as well. Really came through strongly to me just the reflection of so many people it touches every day in their life, but reflecting in my own family, 4 close relatives that have migraine on a semi or regular basis. And I know from all of the conversations that we've had tonight how prevalent it is and how understood that, how lack of understanding there is about that as well. I wanted to thank you all for coming along tonight, for sharing your questions, and also hopefully for spending some time talking with our panellists a little bit later, but also for those of you that support both the Migraine Foundation and the Neurological Foundation in the work that we're leading to help with awareness, understanding, and the research that's so important about bringing better outcomes for those that are living with the diseases. I wanted to also thank the Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron for hosting us at this beautiful venue. Such a lovely place. I really like the atmosphere that we have there. And a really huge thank you to the team that have pulled this event together. None of this happens without lots and lots of work, and people in both the organisations have worked tirelessly to make sure that we've had a great evening tonight. This is actually the last of the Neurological Foundation Brain Awareness Month events that we've been having around the country. We've been recording them all, and as per the ones that we've already carried out, you'll be able to see those on the websites in the not too distant future. Keep a lookout for the email updates. So you get to be able to share it with friends and family that won't be able to hear today. And lastly, just reflecting on the work that the Neurological Foundation has been leading over the last 4 years, and the funding that goes into the vital research that's needed to help address diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and as we've heard tonight, migraine. We're really proud that we fund about $5 million of research every year, and that comes from the help of Kiwis all around the country. It's not funded through the government at all, so a huge thank you to everybody that helps us to do that. So I'm going to pass back to Nicole to close us out, I think.
Ngā mihi nui. Thank you, Rich. Just to echo what you said, thank you so much to our panel. You've been inspiring and informative, and I think we've all benefited from hearing your wisdom and knowledge tonight. I'd also like to thank Glenda and Emmanuel from the Neurological Foundation who've supported me preparing for tonight. You've been fantastic to work with. And to you, our wonderful audience, it's been a pleasure sharing your company, hearing your feedback and your questions. It's my hope that this evening has offered some new perspectives and optimism to everyone who is managing migraine in Aotearoa. Please go well, safe home, and refreshments are now served. Good night.